We all know that Bill Gates is super rich because he founded Microsoft and now helps people around the world through his philanthropic endeavors. But there's a whole lot more to the interesting story of the life of Bill Gates, and this is what the documentary Inside Bill's Brain explores. Bill Gates is one of the most fascinating people on the world. He founded Microsoft to revolutionize the way that people think and interact with technology, making him the richest man on the planet. Then he decided to start the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation together with his wife Melinda to help people around the world by eradicating diseases such as polio, giving people access to better drinking water, food, resources, education, empowering women, and more. The documentary Inside Bill's Brain offers us a look into the life of Bill Gates and what he has done to make the world a better place for everyone. Overall, the documentary was certainly eye-opening with lots of information, stories, events, and anecdotes from Bill Gates and those close with him, such as his siblings, wife, and friends. One thing that was interesting is that there was not a single timeline for this documentary about Bill Gates. At the start, it focused on Bill's childhood and his introduction to computers. Then, it went on to two different timelines. One about Microsoft and his relations with his parents, siblings, Paul Allen, Steve Ballmer, and Melinda Gates. And the other about his philanthropic endeavors to reinvent the toilet, improve sanitation, eradicate polio, and solve climate change through renewable energy sources, focusing his efforts on TerraPower. One thing that was present throughout this documentary was Bill Gates' relentless pursuit to work harder and solve problems even though they might seem impossible to most. Let's now start off with the high-level ideas. The first one is obviously Bill Gates' Think Week. Every year since the 1990s, Bill Gates takes a week off to disconnect and read lots of books and technical papers. And he also references a lot to his brain being like a CPU. This is similar to how other cool people like Elon Musk think about their brains. When confronted with something difficult, he always says work harder, and he has a relentless pursuit to solve problems. Now let's move on to the lessons from Bill Gates' childhood and his introduction to computers. Bill Gates was born in 1955 to Mary Maxwell Gates and Bill Gates Sr. Bill Gates smiled a lot as a kid, and he references as to how he's still a very optimistic person today. His mother Mary Gates was very involved in the local community and was a board member in many meetings. Sometimes she was the only woman, and she wanted her children to be successful. Bill didn't like authority and used to just be in his room and read tons of books as a kid. Bill also used to get really frustrated, and instead of being upset about it, he used it to fuel himself. Instead, he thought, let's go faster and solve this problem, and what's between us and victory? He was also really competitive. Mary Gates also forced Bill to socialize by inviting him to dinners she or Bill Gates Sr. was invited to. She also helped a lot during the starting of Microsoft. Now, moving on to the story of Paul Allen, who co-founded Microsoft with Bill Gates. Paul Allen sought out Bill and Kent, one of Bill's classmates, after they both did well in math, to learn programming. They both learned programming and were soon asked to make a class schedule maker when the nearby girls' school wanted to merge. And Bill Gates talked about how there were lots of constraints in the problem and he had to make a schedule for 400 students. So Paul and him worked day and night for weeks to make it possible. And when they finally did it, they decided to work for other companies and schools to help them by using programming. Now let's move on to the lessons from the founding of Microsoft. Bill Gates saw the Altair 8800 being released and wanted to join the computer revolution, so he built software for it. Thus, Microsoft was born. Bill worked all the time, while Paul liked other interests such as guitar. So they had some issues and disagreements and were close sometimes and distant other times. This led to Paul becoming less interested in Microsoft, and he didn't have a desire to run a big company. So Paul soon left. Now comes the introduction of another key player in Microsoft, and that's Steve Ballmer. Steve Ballmer was critical to making Microsoft a big company, like Paul Allen was in the start of Microsoft. However, in 2000, the US government accused Microsoft of illegally maintaining a monopoly position in the PC market. Bill talks about how, in the 3-day deposition, there was a highlight reel being spread around, and that showed him usually looking quite annoyed, sarcastic, and not really answering the questions. And for the first time in his life, Bill actively sought out distraction during the 2000 antitrust lawsuit against Microsoft. Another aspect that was interesting was Bill Gates' relations to others, particularly his wife, Melinda Gates, and Warren Buffett. Bill's mother wanted him to meet Warren Buffett, and Bill was originally reluctant as he was too busy with Microsoft. However, after much insistence, they met and talked for hours, and they soon became close friends. Now let's move on to his philanthropic endeavors. Bill Gates wrote an article in 1997 about how children in poor countries were dying from diarrhea. This is unusual as you wouldn't hear stories of children elsewhere in the world dying from diarrhea. And although he already started working on philanthropic endeavors, he wanted to make a bigger impact than just donating computers to children from poor countries. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation also focused on eradicating polio. For Western countries, polio is a distant memory, but was still very present in developing countries around the year 2000. It was still prevalent because of the poor sanitation. When Bill Gates was trying to eradicate polio, they noticed that once polio would seem to decrease in one area, it would suddenly increase in another area. So they crunched lots of data and accurately predicted when the next outbreak would be, even before it happened. This helped in the efforts to eradicate polio, is today almost eradicated throughout the world. In the third episode of the 3-part documentary about Bill Gates, they focus on climate change. One way that Bill Gates feels that we can solve climate change is through nuclear power. Nuclear power is a renewable source of energy which can allow us to gain huge amounts of energy with very little resources used, making it clean and sustainable. However, nuclear power has bad public perception due to it being associated with danger, disaster, and chaos, because nuclear is associated with bombs and radiation. For example, the 1986 Chernobyl disaster and 2011 Fukushima disaster and the amounts of radioactive waste showed how dangerous nuclear power could be to the rest of the world. However, there's been little innovation in nuclear for many decades, and many current nuclear power plants use designs from the 1950s and 1960s. Also, more people are killed by coal than by nuclear each year. Statistics from the documentary showed that nuclear power has caused less than a few thousand deaths in total, while coal kills 800,000 people every year. Thus, Bill Gates is working with TerraPower to bring about innovations in nuclear energy. Here are the top lessons and notes that I've taken from this amazing documentary. I would highly recommend everyone to take a look at this interesting documentary from Netflix to learn more about one of the most fascinating people in the world. If you like this video and would like to learn more about fascinating people, book reviews, tech reviews, app reviews and more, do make sure to subscribe and see you in the next one.